So I'm Frank Kelly. I've been working on engagement for a long time. The last 30 years doing various types of market research panels. And last year or so I moved over more towards the incentive side, and I work on strategizing on how to incentivize research participants. I think I might get my water. See you there.
Okay, very good. Just a quick thing as well. Immediately after this session, we've got the keynote in the other room. So if you want to make your way over there, that starts at 4:30.
Okay.
Over to you.
Good. So what I'm going to talk about, incidents of participation. Personally, I think that most of the fraud problems we're always talking about are a function of the fact that we're not attracting enough people to participate in research. And so what are the barriers to participation? What are we doing that's chasing people away? We'll talk about that. Looking at what people prefer in terms of, this is all UK data. I've run a bunch of survey research across several different panels of different types to try and get sort of what I think is more or less a good representation of the marketplace. And to answer your question, Deborah, well, certainly in the US, it's about 4 panels. I've been on 3 or 4 different panels, and I've come up each time with the same number, 4 to 4.5 panels. In the UK, it was a little less, it was about 3 to 3.5, but on the average participant. We'll get to that later. But so the point I bring that up is that by looking across several different types of panels, an exchange, one of the larger research panels, as well as an intercept or dynamically sourced panel, I feel like I've got a good fix on what research respondents think about in the UK market. So some of the engagement issues I'll touch on and to do this, in each of these panels, I first ran a couple hundred completes with just a bunch of open-ended questions, and then went back and did some closed-end questions and various techniques to try and tease out the real thinking. And then since I go to too many conferences. I've been to a lot of conferences, and all the conversations are about AI. And so really just want to touch base a little bit on how do we need to adapt the research process to research participants are going to see changes in the way that research is conducted, and how will that influence research participants, and ultimately decide how we can improve the survey taking process. So this is my research manifesto, if you will. This is just the highlights. I go about 20 or 30 different items, in my opinion, that we need to really get a clear connection between things like as simple as the LOI of a survey and the amount of incentive points. You'd be surprised how many survey, in these open-ended questions, countless people complain that they start a 5-minute survey and it takes them 20 minutes. It's something that a lot of people complain about, that there isn't that connection. The real underlying thinking here is that comes out throughout all the research I've done, is that people want to be treated fairly. And research companies might feel like they're treating their respondents fairly, but if they're not treating them fairly in every distinct aspect of the things that they're being asked to do, then that bothers them. So a simple thing like, if they're being asked an open-ended question versus a closed-end question, or if they need to be part of a discussion forum, it has to be a higher incentive. So the amount of cognitive load should be tied to how much they're being incentivized. The level of intrusion of privacy, if you want them to, track their internet activity, and so forth, you should be giving them higher incentive than if you're just asking them to do survey completes. If you're asking them to do a video, that should be trigger for a higher incentive payment. Inconvenience. So yeah, the biggest one was if you want to meet them, you want them to be on a virtual focus group at 7 o'clock on Thursday night. Then they want 10 times the reward or 20 times the reward. But the fact of the matter is, to the discussion was had earlier, the reality is that the qualitative people are paying about 100 times more than the quantitative people, literally. And in terms of cost, incentive per hour paid, it's not uncommon here, I'm sure, to get maybe 75 to 100 pounds for an online focus group of, say, 60 to 90 minutes. But 60 to 90 minutes on a quantitative survey, if there was such a thing, would net you, £2 maybe. So so specific times, if you want it has to be on a computer, or some other, if they have to download an app, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever you're asking them to do, tie what you're incentivizing them to do to the amount of, say, intrusion or the amount of inconvenience. So if you're pushing them to do something they don't necessarily want to do, then compensate them for it. And the same sort of thing goes for surveys. We all know the bad surveys, or these trackers that are just hell to get completed every month. People tend to pay because they tend to pay one set of incentive levels for a given LOI. So the worst survey in the world gets paid. You get paid if the survey taker the same as the best survey in the world, the most engaging survey in the world, and that's not right. Because these people really feel like they hate bad surveys. But if you say, all right, this isn't one of our favorite surveys, so we're going to pay you an extra 50%, they'd feel a lot better about it. There'd be a lot less attrition. And somebody made the point earlier about how bad surveys, a couple of bad surveys is what drives people out. In fact, Chris, you did a study on that some years back, I remember. So, incidents on the panel. So this is where I went to an intercept model, the closest thing to an RDD that exists in the world. It's sort of essentially people that mistype URLs, and then they ask them a couple of quick questions before they drop off. And said, all right, have you ever been on a panel in the UK? 12%, and I explained what a panel was, etc. 12% said, yes, I've been on a research panel. And then I asked the follow-on question, are you still on the research panel, basically? And 52% said, yes, they're still participating in research panels. So that nets out to about 7% of the UK population. I don't know if it's overstated, probably is. I don't think it's quite that high, realistically, but the people that answer surveys are more likely to be survey participants. There's lots. It's very hard to get good data on this, but anyway, just even asking the general population this question, and you get down to 7%, that still doesn't seem like enough to me. I think if we had a bigger group, we might still have all the same fraud problems we have, but we'd have a larger group of available participants to work with. I think we'd be better off. So then the question is, how important are incentives? And the fact of the matter is they're very important to people. 27% said it's the only thing I consider. Another 44% say it's very important. So there you're up to whatever that is, 75% or so of the people saying that it's critical, basically. And very few people say it's not that important. Not important, not all important, 2%. So people are in this for the monetary or incentives that are being offered. And don't kid yourself that they're not. So the next question then logically is, all right, so what would you say best describes how you feel about the value of the incentives received to participate in surveys? And much better than expected, not too many people. Somewhat better, a little bit, but fully, you've got about almost half of the people down here saying it's less than what they expect and what they feel is right. And if you think about this, if this was paid, people in your company that were getting paid, and half of them said they weren't happy with the pay, that would be a problem. You can expect you'd have some attrition, right? These numbers to me indicate that you should expect some attrition in these panels. And these numbers are better than the US, by the way. And that's it. So, typical survey is about 15 minutes, right? That's been the historical average. And so, essentially, remember that first question I asked, are you part of a panel? Okay. Of people that were not part of a panel, I then said, okay, so this is again from that intercept study sample. You're not part of a panel, what would it take for you to get interested in participating in panel? If for a typical 15-minute study, we were to give you 50 pence, a pound, all the way up, I ran up to 6 pounds is what I offered. And this is the percentage. 54% said no amount would interest me in being in a panel. All right, so half the population is off the table right off the bat. Of the 46%, some of them have picked these numbers here, which are not practical, and I don't think anybody's going to pay £5 for a 15-minute survey, £20 an hour. It's not going to happen in our lifetime. But of those 46% that were willing, here's the breakdown into the 100% of what they're requesting. And so you can see, 24% right there, and another 13 at £1 are really only asking for, at 50 pence, that's £2 an hour. And I know the numbers in the US are somewhere around maybe about 30 to 40 cents for a 15-minute study typically. I think it's probably maybe a little higher here. Maybe it's 40 cents, 50 cents, or pence max. I figured it out at about, on the next slide I'll tell you, I did it at about 40 pence, which was my best estimate. I can't belong to panels here. I'm on 12 panels in the US. Here. But you can see, if we were to raise the available incentive up to even 50 pence, you can attract a much larger group of people than what we have today. So what does that translate to? If you ask them how much have they accumulated over the last 12 months doing surveys, it came to an average of about 71 pounds per year in the last 12 months. And at, I think it's 40 pence per survey, that's about 200 surveys on average for every these are now people on the panel. So I switched to panel participants. So among people that are on panels, they're doing about 200 surveys a year, earning about 71 pounds. There's some slight differences. For some reason, the men are paid more than the women. No, at least they perceive they are. I don't know if that's reality. And the older people seem to be getting a little bit more money. I didn't break out the percentages on these, but just around the, are you on one panel or several, 2 to, I forget exactly how I worded it, 5 or more. And this was the breakout. So you can see that indeed the number of panels that you're on does drive how much money you make. And there are quite a few people that are on multiple panels. Like I said, I'm sure the average is somewhere around 3.5 panels per respondent. I'm going to change the order here. I put these in the wrong order. So what type of incentive do you prefer? And this is, again, UK data. And, so indeed, Amazon is always the big, the number one choice. It's particularly fungible, if you will. You can sell it on the secondary market. You can very easily just copy the code and put it into your bank account. So it's very quick, and it's the simplest sort of motive, incentive, around. Cash transfer to bank is particularly strong here in the UK. It's much weaker in the rest of Europe, and very, very low in the US, relatively speaking. And that's where you need to start to look at, if you're dealing across markets, what are the preferences by market. But yeah, cash transfers are quite strong in the UK. PayPal is reasonably strong compared to, like, say, Germany, where it's at 74% Germany. So they're stronger in other markets. The high street retailer vouchers, which is just what it is. That's more or less the brick and mortar vouchers, if you will. I had a hard time figuring out how to exactly word all these things, because there are other e-vouchers and a lot of different things. And I even put in some things that aren't typically given for incentives, but could be, like crypto or gaming credits, just to see and see some interesting data on that coming up. So I start to break it, first of all, by age. So you can see PayPal, Venmo doesn't exist in this market, but PayPal here, very near universal, acceptance among and preference among younger groups, but it declines quite a bit with age. Visa and MasterCard, again, pretty strong with the younger group, and those are the virtual visas in MasterCard. I also checked physical, but that's not that big. And by the way, most of this data is pertaining to the research group I did it among, which is online quantitative panels. So the typical issuance amount is like 25 pounds or 20 pounds or even a little less sometimes. So it's not the B2B panels or medical panels that might be paying 100 pounds or more. Because they would have a different selection here. Those clearly skew towards cash equivalents, cash to cash equivalents, PayPal, cash to bank, etc. Again, you can see Amazon's quite strong across the board, a little bit less so among the young people. High street retail vouchers, much stronger here in the UK among older people, etc. You see crypto really only being of interest to the young people. And same with gaming credits. And interestingly, when you look at it by gender, you can see similarities across the board until you get down to the, PayPal being more preferred by men, and the high street vouchers more preferred by women. And then you get down to some, again, these kind of small potato ones, but crypto, it's really young men that are interested in crypto. And same thing with gaming credits, for example. But again, those are some of the most important groups, so we got to figure out the right way to incentivize and motivate them, We've been working on some of those offers because they're important to certain groups. Loyalty points weren't that big in this market, but they were actually fairly big in some other European markets. So, the point of all this is that you do really need a variety of incentive offers to, if you want to appeal to different age groups, different genders, different, people have different motivations for for participating in research, and those tend to drive the types of research, type of offers that they choose. And we'll get to that a little bit later, what some of those motivations are, actually right now. So when you ask them that question, thinking about if you just redeemed an incentive, what would be your goal for redeeming? What was the reason why you plan to do with that incentive? And so then you give them some different things, as a treat or something special versus spending it on a necessity versus savings account, putting in your savings versus giving it to charity or saving for a particular goal like a vacation, so there's different objectives. And you can see kind of a good mix, treat being an important one, being the largest one at 38%. And quite interestingly, these, what their objective is really drives what they redeem. So people, when I did this in the States, for example, the treat was very heavily towards MasterCard and Visa because it's like a separate account that they can use for different things. And then you look at those accounts, when I look at the spending on those accounts, which I can do, it's disproportionately in favor of things like going out to eat or entertainment and things like that. So it's something special, a special sort of treat. Other people, when you look at, savings, the money's going straight to PayPal or bank account. So you have to understand and motivate, and I think you need to keep this in mind because when you're trying to attract people into your panels, you have to be able to speak their language, speak what's motivating, understand what's motivating them to participate. This is good news, I think. How do you feel about the process of redeeming electronic payments and gift vouchers? I was expecting some bad news here because sometimes it can be complicated, but really, most people said it was very easy, 39% were somewhat easy. Only a relatively small number of people found it difficult to redeem these types of coupons. So I think that's good news. I didn't really see any, in all the thousands of verbatims that I read through, there really was very little criticism of the redemption process. Other than, if it's a bit too slow, which, you were mentioning some people don't, for the most part, any incentive should be more or less real time, and but some research companies do tend to take a couple of weeks or more in the redemption process for cash flow reasons or I don't know what the reasons. Not so much a operational reason. I have some verbatims on this later, but the question was, really asking about sweepstakes, and again, this looks like a little bit like one of those biased questions, but I got a bunch of open-ended questions on this, and I'm just gonna, this is what I was seeing, very few people saying they really like sweepstakes. Some people say they don't trust them, they don't think that the chances of winning are very good. Most of them just say, I just want to accumulate points towards rewards. And in the verbatims, they were really saying, what they really want is, that they're fine with sweepstakes as long as they're a incremental extra benefit, as long as they have the guaranteed number of points or guaranteed incentive for whatever they said they were going to do, then this is a bonus, but it's never as the main course. Again, and from an engagement perspective, we saw a lot of concerns about the engagement, the process of qualifying for surveys, and what we're seeing, is that only about a third of people said that they're satisfied with the screening process of getting into a survey. That's probably the area that I find has the most friction from people. And you all know, ever since programmatic has come in and people don't use available profile data the way they used to pre-qualify people for surveys and so forth, and then passing the data in the way they used to. So people are seeing a lot more repetitive, spending a lot more time now that a lot of these, there's a network of panels going through the exchanges and so forth, where you might end up bouncing across a lot of different surveys before you get accepted into one. It's not a good process. That's probably the most broken part of the research process today. It really needs some work, and there's a lot of that chatter in. But if you ask an open question, what can you do to improve research, the process of conducting research? They will tell you chapter and verse about late disqualifications, repetitive questions, things like that. They often feel like they should be given points for screening. And I can't say as I argue with them, some of the panels are giving points for screening, but it's often like, they're giving me 2 points, why can't they give me at least 5? They're not like they're asking for the world. So this, they would imagine a vertical line here I'm going to put in there. So I asked sort of a choice question, getting to the question of do people want shorter or longer surveys or more points? And the simple answer is, if you ask, all right, here's a 5-minute survey, a 10-minute survey, a 15 or 20-minute survey, and choose which you would pick. 5 minutes at 25 points, it's a straight line in this first question, up to 20 minutes at 100 points. So it's exact same points per minute. And you can see you get, a lot of people picking 10 and 20, good mix. Then the question is, can you influence that by disproportionately giving more points and accelerating the points per minute here? And you can drive people towards longer surveys. I've tested this a bunch of different ways of asking the question, and the reality is, the good news is, if you do have longer surveys, and you really need to get some completions, you have 30-minute surveys. The real answer is that people are so frustrated with the qualification process, once they get into a survey, they'd rather pick whatever one has the most points, so they don't have to waste 10 minutes to get to the next survey. So in general, you don't necessarily even have to accelerate the points per minute, but I think it's a good idea because what people hate is somewhere around 10% of the surveys, they run into a glitch somewhere 10 minutes in, 15 minutes in, they don't get their points, and that really frustrates them because or very late screen outs or what have you. So there's the trade-off. They'd like the longer surveys with more points, but they know that they're risking the chance of getting nothing because there's a non-zero chance of getting booted out and or survey crashing or something happening. So, but we can, and I didn't actually show it here, but I asked the same question on interesting topics versus less interesting topics. And people will, they have a stronger opinion on that than they do on this, in the sense that they will prefer they'll take less points for a topic they're interested in rather than more points for a topic they're not interested in, to a larger extent than they will trade off on minutes. So, it's an interesting thing. I want to touch base on chatbots a little bit. I'm a big believer in, I believe big qual is going to be a big thing. It's obviously starting to see it. Everybody's seeing it. There's a lot of companies pushing chatbots at the moment. Some still feel it's a little ways away, but one way or another, it's coming. It's coming soon. Where essentially, in many types of surveys, it'll really be, a discussion guide, and let the chatbot handle that questions for you and do some extra probing and come back to some of the stuff we used to have in the caddy days. But anyway, the point is, within the next couple of years, you're going to see a lot of surveys with chatbots. Where the nice thing about it is you get all those more open-ended responses that can be summarized by AI, etc. More qualitative type of responses. So good news is, people seem to be open to the concept. About 2/3 of the people there say sure that they'd be happy to answer a survey from a chatbot instead of just a regular closed-end survey. So, but the one thing I've been seeing a lot of the presentations on the various chatbots that people are introducing is that so many of them are want it to be like a virtual interview, more like coming from the qualitative world. And I do want people to recognize that people do, and this is back to my original first slide, if you're going to ask for people to give in on privacy and things such as showing their face, you got to pay them extra for it. So first of all, would you be willing to do audio but not video? 12%. Would you be doing the video as long as they don't show my face? Yeah, some percentage. Sure, only 26% basically said, yeah, I'll do a video. Most of them say no, just standard surveys are fine with me. So we've seen this for years. I've done a lot of video research, video answers, and things of various types. There's always a certain amount of, more than half the people usually don't want to turn on the camera. But you can motivate people to do it. The question is, do you really need that for a chatbot interview? Generally, no. Text is fine, but a lot of companies, because they want to get higher quality of feedback and so forth, they want to do videos. It comes at a cost, is the point. And that's what this slide is saying. Would you expect to receive a higher incentive if you're required to do a video? The simple answer is yes. Of course, you'd expect them. It's kind of a given answer to that. But I saw this, throughout, again, open-ended as well as just this closing question that people expect to be paid if they're going to be asked to do that kind of privacy intrusion. I also asked a question like this, which is just, this is again on a survey panel. What other types of research do you participate in the past year? I think I said. In-home product tests really are basically run off survey panels anyway. But, a little bit of telephone or in person, and some central location, diaries and various things like that. But again, what I think we need to see is we need to move this to a much more diverse group of things, because research is, as the qualitative is learning how to scale up on larger groups using the tools of AI that make it efficient. Then you're going to see a lot more broader types of research being participation. And to me, the biggest issue that's going to prevent this is we don't currently have an incentive strategy that works to take quantitative panelists and bring them into the qualitative world, because of all those thresholds that they have to jump over that people aren't compensating people for, that are expected in when it comes to that type of research. So, again, in the UK, from the panel, this is just some of the coding I did, some of the open ends. So just asking a simple question: what can we do to make research better or more enjoyable? 23% saying, hey, we need higher incentives, and particularly a lot of them were mentioning screening process not getting compensated for. And so some companies might get screened for they might get compensated for the initial screening questions, but then they don't get into that survey, then they go on to the next one, they bounce onto the next platform and they don't get the incentive. So it might seem like they're getting points, but they're only going to get them for 1 out of the 3 sets of screening that they do, typically. On average, you do about 4 sets of screening. Problems with the qualification process I mentioned, survey design issues. The respondents were surprisingly, again, people probably do a lot more surveys than you expect that they do. So if they're doing, a couple hundred completions a year, that means they're probably they're doing surveys almost every day. And so they see hundreds of surveys. To get into 200, they have to probably start 1,000. And the average incidence is actually below 20%. So, you see 1,000 surveys in a year, that's 3 a day roughly. You're going to get a point of view on what a good designed, and they were coming into very specific things. It should be more graphic, more pictures like Schifrin provided. Colorful pictures. There should be more better fonts and higher contrast, and a lot of people brought up the progress bars. Things that could be done to really improve the surveys experience. And again, about 10% of the people were mentioning that they didn't get credit for a survey that they completed. So, and it's not surprising, again, recognize that people do hop across a lot of different platforms. It can be a problem. The credit doesn't always, something breaks somewhere along the way. And then repetitive questions. Just one last slide, a few examples of some of the verbatims. I asked a lot of questions about other questions, like should there be a bonus for length of how long you've been on the panel or various things. They love every kind of bonus you can get, anything that gives them points, of course. But, there should be a bonus for random people who complete surveys, allow people to pause a survey. Again, we always used to be able to pause surveys, except for certain types of surveys, but now, again, because we're going across different platforms, it's not as easy to restart a survey as it used to be. And not many surveys can be restarted anymore, quantitative surveys. Typically, very few of them allow restarting. Band screening of more than 10% completed. Yeah, so a lot of people have exact points of view on how many, shouldn't be able to ask more than 5 questions before you get screened out or whatever. Less repetitive screening questions snappy and to the point. Sometimes they're too long-winded and confusing. Again, I take a fair bit of surveys, and we saw the presentation this morning. I really think the net result is there are less experienced researchers writing the surveys than there used to be. There's a lot of people who can just write a survey. I write surveys. And do I do as good a job as, I don't know. I mean, it's become very easy to do surveys, and I think that's part of the problem. Repetitive details, improved screening procedures, etc. Okay, so sorry, it's a bit of a fast-paced run through, but as you can see, there's a fair bit of engagement issues, but they're all solvable, and I think that having a good understanding of making the incentivization process and the engagement process part of the overall strategy of the panel is essential, and it's not always what's being done, unfortunately. So we have a couple minutes for questions. Mm-hmm. Yes?
Lizzie, have you seen, kind of going back to something you said earlier when you were talking about the different incentive amounts, have you seen clients being willing to, or companies in general, being willing to sacrifice sample size for higher compensated and at least maybe theoretically more motivated respondents, or?
Well, I think that the end clients are what's driving that, right? And end clients are starting to say, hey, they don't like quality problems, and so I've been predicting forever the rise of premium panels that make good use of profiling and all this other stuff that we used to do, and sampling, but it hasn't really occurred as yet. So I think the jury's out. I think I still am predicting it will happen, but it hasn't happened as yet. To my satisfaction, yes.
On the willingness to provide a video, is there any breakdown by age on that?
Interesting on that. I thought that the younger people would be more willing, but they're actually, they weren't. In general, it was more the older people. The younger people were a bit more cautious on that front. So it wasn't a strong measures that I included. Interesting. Yes.
I was kind of more fixated on early in the presentation when you said around 7% of the UK population may be on the survey panel, which is probably lower, maybe about 3 or 4.
Yeah.
If you can kind of round it to perhaps a more sensible number. So that number, I'm interested in your thoughts on how you drive that number up beyond people who do take part in panels, and this is the reasons they do take part and they want to do it. Do you think all these reasons that panelists who are on panels at the moment drive, how do you double that number to 6 or 8 or 10%? Do you think that's the reasons, or do you think there's other things we can do to encourage people to come?
Well, I really do think that the process of qualifying for a survey has become less interesting. At the same time, incentives are much less than they were 5 or 10 years ago. And I really believe that the percentage of the population participating in panels was much higher. It's become a lot more concentrated now than it used to be. So I think that, yes, we've driven them away, and there's a potential to get them back, but at the moment, I think that was your phrase, we're the problem. Sorry.
I think we're going to have to call it a day there, just because the other keynote is going to start very shortly. But are you going to be around for the evening as well?
Sure.
Fantastic. So if you can answer questions.